The Hammer of the Emperor has got some interesting changes in the new chapter approved. Let's see what the guards are going to be looking like going into 2020. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. I know I've been mainly focusing on Space Marines over the past few months, but I thought it's time for another Imperial Guard video, as they're one of the armies that I play the most, and so I'm most familiar with their units and war gear options, and exactly what has changed going into the new chapter approved. I think that this has been a largely positive update, though I think that there are a few dropped balls on Games Workshop's part here. On the whole though, I do think it's a positive for the Guard Codex, and it's most certainly going to make me consider some units and options that I hadn't before. If I have missed any obvious changes here, please let me know down in the comments. There are a whole ton of units and war gear options in the Astra Militarum Codex, and I couldn't find any consolidated list of points increases and reductions anywhere on the internet yet, so I've mainly been doing these by myself. So please let me know if you spot anything else. I'm sure we'd all be interested to hear it. Without further ado, let's get into the changes. So first of all, let's talk about the things that haven't changed. Firstly, there was a lot of rumours about tank commanders going up in points cost, and frankly I wouldn't have been so surprised if they had. They're a very solid shooting option, and certainly when combined with certain regiment traits, stratagems and relics, they have some of the most efficient shooting in the game. I could have easily seen them going up 10 points or so, and remaining being a valid unit, but they decided not to do this. Secondly, the infantry squad points cost stayed the same. It's remained at 4 points per model. They haven't gone up to 5 points, as has been rumoured in basically every single new chapter approved. I was really worried about them this time because, as we know, Chaos Cultists went up to 5 points per model in the last chapter approved, rather than nerf Guardsmen to the same level, which frankly I don't think was really needed. They chose to decrease the Chaos Cultists back down to 4 points again, which in my book makes total sense. So I'm glad that the infantry squad remains unchanged. We're not exactly seeing entire foot guard armies flooding the meta at the moment, and I'm sure we would if they were overpowered. Sadly, the Deathstrike missile launcher and Wordbane Psychers haven't received any type of buff. In my opinion, they're two of the weakest units in the entire codex and could really have used a points drop. Unfortunately, they've got through this one without a buff, so I'm sure in any sort of competitive play they'll be remaining on the shelves until chapter approved 2020, where maybe they'll have some hope. Let's get into the actual points changes now then. First up is a change I really like. Tempesta Sans have dropped 2 points down to 7 points a model. This combined with the free hotshot volley gun they have means that they're now more of a credible drop infantry threat. I think they're now at a price point where they can actually compete with regular guardsmen and veteran squads, and we could easily see them included in many lists to provide a cheap deep strike threat that can capture objectives if needed. One slight concern is that this is quite a big shift, as it means that we now have a new cheapest Loyal 32 available, and that's actually going to be a Loyal 17 with 3 units of 35 point Tempesta Sans and 2 company commanders for 30 points. That means that Guard can now field a battalion of 165 points, and potentially even less if you do some silly things with including some Death Corps of Krieg characters in there. I believe that the Death Corps of Krieg Field Marshal is 23 points if memory serves. Please correct me if I'm wrong down below. So that would mean that the minimum cheapest battalion Guard can field is now only 151 points. A very nice way indeed for getting 5 extra command points in your army, particularly if your army doesn't lose any benefits due to souping, unlike the new Space Marines. Tempesta Sans are a great ally as they can drop in all over the board and secure hard to reach objectives which your main force may struggle to do. I could even see a Loyal 32 type format where you have a couple of guardsmen squads and a couple of officers to order them, and maybe just include one Tempesta Sans squad for a backfield objective grabbing type squad. You can mix and match. I think they're now a lot more well balanced. They've gone from being a bit lacklustre on the tabletop to a very points efficient little unit. The next change is a bit of a perplexing one if you ask me. Astropaths have come down a whopping 11 points and are now only 15 points. I think that this was a bad change. I'm not sure if Games Workshop have realised that Astropaths can take las pistols and therefore not have to buy in the expensive Telepathica stave, so you can actually field them for just 15 points. I already thought that my Astropath with Psychic Maelstrom at 26 points was possibly the best value unit in the entire game of 40k. He kicks out a decent amount of mortal wounds over the battle for a tiny investment. That tiny investment has now shrunk even further, and now he's definitely in mega auto-include territory. I think that this change has kind of made Primaris Psychers pretty redundant. For the price of 1 Primaris Psyker, you can get 3 Astropaths, and no 3 of the guard powers, which they cast just as well. The only thing that you lose out on is Smite, but Psychic Maelstrom is basically a very similar version of Smite, and has the potential to be targeted, which ups its utility. I was often tempted to use Primaris Psychers before to fill in a HQ choice in the list. If I really want Psychic support now, and to fill an HQ choice, I may as well buy a Company Commander for 30 points, another Astropath for 15. It'll cost me 1 point less than a Primaris Psyker would, and then I'll have both a decent Psyker, and all the benefits that a Company Commander can bring for you. I think this was a very silly change. Astropaths were already great. Now they're so cheap they're sort of making the Primaris Psyker redundant, which is a bit silly for game balance. Next we have a change that I like a lot. The standard Lehman Russ chassis has dropped 15 points, so your basic Battle Cannon Russ will cost you 137 points when he's armed with a Battle Cannon and a Hull Heavy Bolter. Before this, I pretty much wouldn't have considered the regular Russ as an option when I had access to more Tank Commander slots. The Tank Commander's damage output was just so much better. Now they're decently cheaper, there's now a lot more of a decision to be made. My prediction is that we're going to see a lot of these guys running around with Demolisher Cannons in the near future, seeing as the Demolisher Cannon has such a high ludicrous damage output, and these tanks are cheap enough that you don't really mind too much if they get locked up in close combat, so you can afford to venture them further forwards to fire that Demolisher Cannon at its low 24-inch range. I was a bit concerned about doing this with a loaded up Tank Commander before, because you're exposing a big investment to the enemy fire, but because these guys are so cheap, you could run say 3 of them with Demolisher Cannons and scare the hell out of your opponents, who probably won't want to be putting anything big and tough in the middle of the table unless he wants it hit by 3 Demolisher Cannons. I think that this was a good change, and we're definitely going to see a lot more Lehman Russ back on the table now. It is pretty scary just how much toughness 8 armor we can now field. You could buy 9 of these 137 point Russes for under 1300 points. So if you really wanted to go nuts and field an all tank army, you could also include your 3 tank commanders and Pask on top of that. 13 Russ army, anyone? I suspect someone's going to try it. Someone who owns more Russes than me. The next change is another stupid one, unfortunately. For some reason Games Workshop in their wisdom have decided to increase the price of Ogryns by 6 points. Now Ogryns were rarely seen played on any sort of level, competitive or casual. They certainly weren't in any way overpowered, and they didn't need a massive 6 points price hike. I genuinely think that either this was probably a typo with people trying to reduce their point in Ogryns, or there was some sort of miscommunication at the Games Workshop Rules Studio. They wanted to increase the price of Bullgryns, who are seen regularly in competitive tournament play, but accidentally messed up and increased the price of Ogryns instead. I really hope that this change gets addressed and they get put back to at least what they were before in an FAQ. I'd be absolutely happy if they did this in the FAQ's chapter approved itself. It's definitely a nerf that did not need to happen. On a more positive note, Rattlings have gone down 2 points. They'd be increased up to 9 points per model in a previous chapter approved, which to be honest was a change I didn't really agree with. They're now back at their original points value. I certainly don't believe that they're overpowered in any way, but they're an interesting infantry unit with the sniper ability and some fun movement shenanigans. I certainly think that this was a good change. It might convince some people to put Rattlings on the tabletop, though I think I'd personally rather have more tough bodies or heavy weapons about myself. The next change is the Wyvern is going up 10 points. He'll now be 113 points with the Hull Heavy Bolter. I'm a bit meh about this change. I do agree that they've got a lot stronger recently, particularly with the advent of that Vigilus formation that allows them to shoot twice, the Emperor's Wrath Artillery Company, and ignores line of sight shooting is a very powerful ability. I'm not 100% sure that 10 points was really necessary. I might have put them up 5 myself. They're just not going to be quite as an efficient a pick as previously, but I suspect they'll still see play. Finally, for units, a bunch of the Baneblade chassis variants have seen a points decrease. The Baneblade, Banesword, Doomhammer and Banehammer are all 350 points now before you account for their weapons. I'm afraid I can't say I'm massively familiar with these tanks. It may be that some of the other variants have come down in points too. The Stormlord and Shadow Sword remain at 410, as does the Hellhammer, and the Storm Sword is at 370 before weapons. Into the Wargear section now, and we've got some very interesting changes. Firstly, las cannons and missile launchers have both come down 5 points in cost. Missile launchers are now just a tiny 10 points investment, and the las cannons are 15 points. Considering armies like Space Marines typically pay 25 points per las cannon, the Guard are now getting ours at a fraction of the price. These are going to be very worthwhile taking on any platform that you can get to ballistic skill 3+. The whole weapon of tank commanders can be las cannons, for example. Veteran and command squads can take heavy weapons, and they're still going to be far more of a competitive choice on all our ballistic skill 4 platforms as well. Sentinels of both types. We'll want to be considering both of these weapons a lot more carefully now. The plasma cannon sentinel that was my favourite before will now see some stiff competition from the missile launcher. Who knows, we might even see some heavy weapon teams running around with 3 missile launchers now. At only 48 points per team, it's a lot less painful to lose them than it would be before. They're both now pretty solid options in gunline infantry squads too. Having a missile launcher to plink away with all game for a small investment is not the worst use of points in the world. Next we come to a change that unfortunately I don't like at all. Mortars have gone up to 9 points now. They have gained +4 points per model. This is a change that I think feels like it's come about 2 years too late. At the very start of 8th, mortars were incredibly underpriced, and you could spam as many heavy weapon squads as you wanted. Times have changed a lot, and players definitely shifted to see people taking far fewer mortar teams. Their damage output, while still good, is no longer as far above the curve as it was before. I think that this is largely due to a bit of power creep, with chapter approved repeatedly buffing weak units, as well as some of the new layering of special rules such as with the new Space Marine Codex. In light of all of that, I really don't think that these guys needed to go up. I used to run an absolute ton of mortar squads as a staple in all of my lists at the start of 8th, dropping to just 3 of them when the rule of 3 came into effect. More recently I've not been taking them as much in favour of wyverns, or just more direct line of sight firepower such as tank commanders, who just have better damage output on the whole. I really don't think that this was a change that was needed to be made, and I don't think that we'll be seeing many people using mortars into the future. Ignor's line of sight shooting is very powerful, so I'm just not sure it's powerful enough to justify this increased points cost, particularly when Guard have decent line of sight ignoring options already, such as the Wyvern, Basilisk and Manticore. The final change that I've been able to pick out is the Punisher cannon has gone up 10 points to 30 points now. This was a bit of an unexpected change to me. We have certainly been seeing Punisher cannons about the place, and certainly used in competitive lists. I don't feel that they were necessarily any stronger than the battle cannon. They just fit a bit of a different role as more of a horde clearance type unit. Don't get me wrong, they were certainly strong, but I don't think they were any more strong than the other big weapons at their respective role. Going up 10 points will certainly encourage people to think twice about fielding this tank-mounted Gatling cannon, though whether or not it's enough to deter people from putting one on a tank commander remains to be seen. It can be the absolute death of hordes, particularly Chaos hordes, when combined with the Vengeance of Acadia, and I think that power might still be worth its increased price tag, although it is a bit annoying. So on the whole, a bit of a mixed bag. I like most of the changes, particularly Scions, Leman Russ, Rattlings, Wyvern, las cannons and Baneblades, but I certainly feel that Games Workshop has had a few swings and misses, particularly the Ogryns, Astropaths and Mortars being the main offenders. So it's not potentially as good as it could have been, but on the whole I think that this has been a step in the right direction where balance is concerned. Again, if I've missed anything in terms of points changes for the Guard, please let me know down in the comments, and please let me know what you think of the changes and whether you agree with my analysis. Thanks for listening. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. I'll definitely be getting round to the Guard at some stage. There just seem to be a lot of releases at the moment, and I've been struggling to keep up. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next video.